Hey everybody, today is Wednesday for you guys. It's still the same day as we did the Sunday recording for me and Wally, and we're just gonna talk a bit more about the topic of daily suffering and enduring presence. It's been a while since we did this already, but there's some improvement. Last time we were talking like this in a video from some weeks back, we had to keep 2 meters distance between us. Mm-hmm. Now it's 1 meter.
It's about 1 meter. Yeah.
So there's hope. Next time we'll be hugging.
Not on screen.
So I was thinking about you, the story you were telling, and for those of you who didn't see the video on Sunday, Wally talked about we're in this series called Enduring Presence. And he was talking about sort of the reality of daily suffering, and he talked about this story that the gospel writers tell about this woman who was suffering from a bleeding for 12 years, and she sort of sneaks up to Jesus in the middle of this crowd and touches just the tip of his robe, and then she's healed. But Jesus actually notices that something is going on, stops and asks about it, and there's this interaction. And what I was thinking is how impressive it is that they're telling this story. Because think about it. I mean, Jesus healed a whole lot of people. The Gospels tell some of the stories. But this is the kind of story that you would expect to just like something that happened on the way from somewhere to somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And this woman sort of touches him, and then they continue. But they actually think that they actually make a point out of telling the story, and not just in the Gospel of Mark, but in several of the Gospels. That's sort of a statement in itself, because the Gospel writers had to do this work of choosing, what of these, all that we experience with Jesus, what do we think this is something we need to tell? So why I don't know, I have my own thoughts, but why do you think this is a story that they thought, like, because they didn't give much attention to it at first, right? Yeah. When it's actually happening. But why is this a story that they felt this is a story we need to tell?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it does sort of pop up in the midst of sort of a sequence of these kinds of engagements that Jesus has with different individuals. So like I mentioned, Jesus has this, really, deep, very emotionally charged. I mean, all of these stories are emotionally charged, but this engagement with a demon-possessed man on the eastern side of the Galilee, which is also, in a sense, symbolic. It's generally associated with a non-Jewish side of the region. But he's got this engagement with a very troubled man who's not just demon-possessed, but he's crying out. He's living among the tombs. He's hurting himself. He's cutting himself. So all of these, very very deep and troubling challenges. Then that folds right into the story of Jairus and his 12-year-old daughter, about to die, right? Just thinking about it earlier today, actually, now being a father of a daughter, my daughter's only 2, but thinking about the emotional, psychological, just trauma, right, that is for an individual. And then right inserted into the story. So Jairus' daughter isn't even healed yet. Yeah. But then you have this story of a woman who's been in intense, suffering for 12 years, right? 12 years is a long, long time. So, so I think it sort of fits within that trajectory, that sequencing of stories, I think, where Jesus is engaging people who are, experiencing suffering in a number of different ways. But there's probably also a gender element as well. This is Jesus engaging a woman, right? Now she's unnamed,
an unclean woman,
right? Exactly. So there's a gap, multiple gaps that he's overcoming within an ancient society. So at least within an ancient Jewish context. So and the story is beautiful. It's a beautiful one, right? I mean, it moves me every time I read it. You think of these, this intense suffering. She's a victim. She's clearly a victim of her circumstances, right? Doesn't just have this condition or this disease, but then she's been. I read the doctors that she's been under the care of. These multiple doctors, these many doctors, as victimizers, right? That they're taking advantage of her. Yeah. And she's spent all of her money. Trying to get well, and nothing's happened. And in fact, she's gotten worse, right? That's an interesting really detail there. So it just turned, and then all of a sudden, she hears about Jesus. She reaches out to him, and you'd think that upon her feeling herself becoming well, that there would be joy, right? That she'd be, getting up and walking around and saying, "Yeah, I'm healed," But it's actually like she's terrified. She's scared that she's transgressed a boundary, right?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see her just sort of shaking, maybe even tearful. But then Jesus engages her in such a gentle way, right? Eye contact, words of literally of peace and of wellness. And it's just like that. I don't think there's any other story like that in the Gospels like that is just so beautifully and emotively told, right? It's told with emotion. So then the theological element is also profound. This is one of the few parts, or maybe one of the only, one of the most detailed parts of the Gospels, where this idea of power coming out of Jesus unknowingly, right? I mean, so what does this mean about who Jesus is, right? And so there's certainly a Christological element to it all as well. And so there's just a number of different facets all coming together, suffering, experiencing the power of Christ.
And that they will put like this so clear element of divinity in this moment when it's dealing with something a suffering that would be so mundane in a way, right?
Definitely.
And that, I think that really stands out for me. I think, of course, one element is as you said, is that this is the gender issue, and how Jesus addresses that so directly, and also how this is told in that context, right? How the disciples actually think this is an important story to tell and bring it to the forefront. And suddenly this woman who was on the corners all her life for all of these reasons, she's put in the center of what is the central story of mankind. And I find that very powerful. And the other is what you already mentioned, there's these different sorts of suffering, and you would think that Jesus coming from sort of the spectacular setting, leading with the spiritual world and the demons and all of that, and then going towards what is this tragedy of the death of a daughter, that he would have time for this woman. But he actually stops, right? He actually stops and takes the time. And for me, that's an encouragement. I sometimes I'm sort of shy of telling God about my suffering, because I'm thinking there's so much worse stuff going on. Almost like, why am I going to bring this stuff to Jesus? He has a lot of heavier stuff to deal. But then a story like this tells me, maybe it's okay. Maybe I'm just like trying to reach for. And of course, this was a real problem that this woman had. But again, read in that context, it could be seen as something to be dismissed. There's a whole crowd of people with their issues, all of them touching you, Jesus. What are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? Right.
And Jesus is like, no, I wanna know. I wanna talk.
I think also, just to piggyback on that. Of course, the story is about Jesus. I mean, Jesus is the central figure. But there's a lot of weight in the text, I feel like, that's given to the woman in terms of her own initiative taking, right? And I mean, if you look at if you remember the images that we showed as part of the message, and then even the text itself, I think this is embedded in the text, that, I mean, Jesus is kind of unaware, right? He's sort of the passive figure there. He's being pushed around. People are literally pressing on him, and it's the woman's act of faith, right? It's an initiative of hers that comes out of a place of faith, right? Where she touches and then she's made well. Jesus is sort of the responder to that, and I think that to go along with what you had just mentioned, yes, we need the courage to sort of to approach God, to ask things, and it's that initiative, I think, that God honors, because that initiative comes out of, ideally, becoming out of a place of faith, because we believe that God is a God of power, that God can overcome our circumstances, that God can work within our circumstances, so on and so forth. So of course, Jesus is the hero on a grander scale, but the woman really has this virtue of faith in terms of initiative. So.
And I was also thinking about, again, maybe it's a bit like, but how the difference between a suffering where you see the light in the end of the tunnel, and this state of suffering where it's been so long that you start thinking this is just it, like this is how it's gonna be, right? This is the everyday reality, and we can almost become like callous to the possibility that God would care or want to intervene with that kind of thing, because it's just life is,
Definitely.
and it's hard to break out of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have an example of that, even from the gospel stories. I mean, you have in John chapter 5 a paralytic who has been ill for 38 years, right? And this is no wonder Jesus actually asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Right? I mean, so you, no doubt that this extended period of suffering can do something to our human psyches, right? I mean, it can either bury and break us, or it can lead us to take an opportunity to reach out in faith and trust the Lord with something.
Yeah, and I want to sort of take this to a completely different place now. It's just something else that I was thinking when I was hearing you talk earlier. That I was just thinking about this whole situation now with the lockdown and the corona, and a lot of people who are actually being affected by this, and or in a place of suffering to some extent, either because there's fear or there's insecurity, and there's all of these things. But I was thinking that there's an opportunity in that as well, and the opportunity is to meet each other in our suffering, of just to allow ourselves to be there and to recognize each other in suffering. Mm-hmm. See, there's always a risk of, and in the age of social media, there's a risk on one hand of glorifying our lives and taking all the pictures that make our life look perfect and hiding the suffering. But then there's also the risk of sort of glorifying the suffering and making that our sort of our business card, right? Mm-hmm. But then right now we're in a reality in which we're all sharing a reality of suffering to different degrees. But just having that opportunity to not do neither, but just to recognize and meet each other in that place, and then to find that Jesus actually meets us there as well, as the suffering servant, as Isaiah calls him. I don't know, just something about this meeting with this woman and her daily suffering that is so daily, so normal in a way. But so profound, so profound a meaning that made me think about that. I don't know. It's not a question.
Yeah, no. I think that's a great observation. I mean, this is one of the great things about the way Jesus frames his entire ministry. Certainly, he calls people to follow him, but so often we have these stories about him meeting people where they are, right on the lake shore for breakfast. That's the end of John's gospel, or on the lake while people are engaged in their occupation, right, fishing or something like that, in the midst of a busy street. Jesus is meeting people where they are all the time. So I think, and that's certainly a model for us with how we can be reaching out in other kinds of ways. I mean, we of course have limitations these days with different kinds of health restrictions, but we can I think always find at least one or two things to do where we're meeting people where they are and reaching out with the kinds of power of Jesus sorts of experiences that we ourselves have experienced, and we extend. I think that's the one interesting thing that I see. I forget exactly the details of the Jairus story that comes after the suffering woman, but certainly the Gerasene demoniac and then this woman, the stories both end not just with Jesus says to them, good job, you're healthy.
Yeah.
Great. No, it ends with actually some sort of commission, right? And so the restored demon-possessed man wants to be with Jesus, right? Now that he's been put in his right mind, he wants to follow Jesus around. And he says, no, you stay where you are and go tell everyone what the Lord has done for you, right? And so he goes and basically is a missionary in the Decapolis, right? Then for this woman, it's your daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be freed, or be made well of your affliction. So this idea of going, right? Go about and go, now that you've been made well by the Lord, go and you have a responsibility now to engage the world that you live in, and tell the Lord tell people what the Lord has done. So there is a mission element to experiencing the Lord in our own suffering. I think that suffering in some ways is we're given a responsibility. So I think certainly that the relational, the social, the missional aspect of all of this is bound up not just in the model of Jesus, but the model of these who experienced his healing.
Be made well in your suffering. I think maybe that's a great ending note as well, because it just reminds us that we hear about this one moment, right? This one event, but it's the healing in itself is just the beginning of a healing process, right? Go and be made well of your suffering. And you think about this woman and everything that she gets to work on restoring now, and it doesn't all happen in a moment. Her bleeding stops in that moment, but now she has the opportunity to go through the rituals and come back into the life of worship. She has the opportunity of going back into the social life, of restoring all and making all this hard work of healing, but there's the possibility for that hard work of healing. And the same thing with the guy on the other side, now go and put on some clothes, shave, go
get reconnected.
Get reconnected to your society. You don't need to live in the tombs anymore. Go live in the village. And there's this walk, right? And the place of suffering that looked like the end of the road becomes the beginning of a road. And I think that's the kind of thing that Jesus does. He meets us in our suffering, and he doesn't erase it necessarily. He doesn't deny it, but he gives us the opportunity of that being the beginning of something rather than the end of something. And I don't know, there's a whole lot of different realities that we're experiencing right now, and I don't know for you guys sitting at home, maybe this is one of those moments in which it feels like the end of something. So maybe this story can give us the courage and the faith and the sort of shy stubbornness of this woman to go after Jesus, to touch him, but to have our suffering become the beginning of something when Jesus touches in on our stories. Maybe that's a good way to
I think so,
to end this conversation and this video. Thank you for watching, everybody.